My name is Margaret Ann Windsor. The name I have to use is Peggy Ann Dempsey. I married Childers. I was kidnapped in 41 at age 2, born in 39, brought to Moulton, Alabama, given the name of a dead twin, Peggy Ann Dempsey. The other twin had been killed about a month after birth. They were a year older than me. By their mother, they were born out of wedlock. Peggy was killed, the real Peggy was killed a week or 2 weeks prior to me being brought and dropped off there and given her name, mine stolen. So you can imagine in this dirt poor, but it's not just that. These were sadistic, mean, and they all knew about my kidnapping and they kept quiet. So therefore, and the murders of the twins, they would have faced the gas chamber, Lina, the mother would, but they covered it up and covered up who I really am. I guess they didn't think that was important to me, right? But they could do every vile act possible against me. And later on, when I did a medical malpractice book, and I thought all the hell that was going on at that time was because of the book and the names in it, but it turns out, I found out after I was flown out to Larry Flint's, he had been shot by a program shooter, and that's what I was writing about, and some other things connected to Dr. Larry McDonald, a U.S. congressman. You'd think they'd want to know about all this. They do. Let me assure you, my kidnapping, all of it covered up. Just stop and think if it were told in the horrible crimes committed against my country under the guise of saving us, they invaded us. So I've told all this, and it's on the other videos, and I've had the last 2 months, well, longer than that, slowly my phone has been just like deleted or something. I couldn't get it fixed. Yesterday I did. I think someone who was supposed to fix it walked up and fixed it. Plain and simple as that. Anyway, I came back and I started putting some videos up. I'm so sick, and I've lost a lot of my hearing in both ears the last 3 months because of the way I'm living. Let me put it this way. And believe me, when you start telling the truth about people, suddenly they don't want the truth told, okay? Now let me keep my train of thought here if I can. I'm in pretty bad shape. I may sound skipping around, but I'm lucky to be doing this, I guess. Let me skip back to June the 15th of a couple months ago now, 2018. And I got a call from Sherry, and she was the coordinator, or is, over at Scott Hill Retirement in Clifton Forge. It's about 45-minute hour drive from Roanoke if you have a car. It's a really tiny town, and they make their living off Scott Hill, quite frankly. But I like the little town. It's so small, but it was kind of quaint, and let's face it, I've been kept homeless. By the way, when I was out at Mr. Flint's, the last time I saw him, I was flown out to his home. He helped me in the campaign to replace Congressman Larry McDonald, doctor, who supposedly was shot down by the Russian MiG when it veered into their airspace in August the 31st of 83. Richard Nixon was on that plane from Aurora. I'm saying Aurora. That's the Grand Theater massacre, where they got the poor Mr. Holmes treating him for mental illness. Can you imagine that? He's not mentally ill. He was programmed, just like the man that shot Larry Flint and Governor Wallace, and the school shootings were programmed, the Virginia Tech. Anyway, I'm going to lose my train of thought. From Juneau, Alaska to Seoul, South Korea, August 31st of 83. And I'm Richard Nixon, former president. That gets into the Bloomingdale tapes and what Henry Kissinger, his Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, he's a Jew. part of the Rockefeller, way up in the global government. In fact, they nestle down in the Netherlands. That's relatives of mine. I would hope they don't support it, but I think that possibly they did with Elizabeth and her father. My Uncle George helped in my kidnapping. He's with Roosevelt. And I've put up their connection. Roosevelt's so much a part of this, sorry. And Eleanor, don't let me leave Eleanor out. Okay, this is my Uncle George and Elizabeth's mom, the Queen Mom, who wasn't the Queen Mom. She's a war criminal, Rothschild, the banking, all their money because they sold out my father, Edward VIII. And this picture is a little bit like the one I was christened and when I was born. And the picture that the portrait, the kidnap, I think anyway, the two men that brought me to the Dempseys had a big portrait, a huge one of my father like this, only he was holding me. So it didn't have some of his some of that, I don't know what to call it. Sorry, but I didn't get to live my life. Somebody else did. But he was holding me, and I can remember seeing the picture and thinking he's a good man. And they had handed me to Lina Dempsey, the killer. They put the portrait, it would hardly fit, up in it wasn't an attic. It's wonder it hadn't got soiled and everything. I remember climbing through that hole to get up there. It was hard to do, to climb up there for me. And then one day it was gone. So anyway, this is 1939 when I was born. And this man that history will tell you he's nice, and Winston Churchill was nice, and Eisenhower and Truman and Kennedys are a bunch of cold-blooded bastards. And they deserve to go to hell. That's all I'm going to say. Instead, most people would look, and I don't like pornography, but you should see what I've been through and seen. They would shun Larry Flint, just like they do me, and I haven't broken the law. I was kidnapped 2 years and every friggin' crime in the book done against me. He says here that I know who was responsible for his shooting. And he mentions Larry McDonald here. There was 2 of these endorsements, and I can't find. I don't know how I let it get away, but I did. This is April of '84, and I've never seen him since. What I want to say, though, when I last seen Mr. Flint, I'm sure I'm at bed here, I was going out the door. It was October of '83, and I had lost. I came in 7 out of 20. It was a special election, kind of weird if you go back and check it out. When the plane went down, and I'd written about this man, Larry McDonald. Here I am, a candidate, and I'm going to use up all this, and I wanted to get some other stuff on here while I can. Anyway, Mr. Flint, when I was going out the door, I had never met him till I was flown out there, but I knew his was a mind control shooting. I was doing the book in Marietta, and he was shot in Lawrenceville, Georgia. And I was living at Moonraker, and that's symbolic with the 007 Roger Moore. But the movie didn't come out till a year or 2 years after I did the book and tried to get it published, and they almost killed me April Fool Day of '80. Letter from the FBI. I've put all this up. Ongoing investigation, national security involved. Let me remind you, everybody says tell the truth, swear it. The minute you tell the truth about the wrong people, they'll get you. No longer do they want the truth told. I haven't lied one bit in any of this, so let me just cut to the chase. They've controlled. When I went out the door, Mr. Flint said to me, and that was in October of '83. He furnished me a car for a year. Never saw him again. Couldn't give the car back. I was cut off from him, yet they send this to me. They knew where I was all the time in D.C. I worked for Ron Ziegler of the Watergate. He was the good guy. Okay? They're probably the only good guy in the whole friggin' bunch. I was walking out the door, and someone said, "Aren't you going to tell Mr. Flint goodbye?" And they looked to see where he was, and they took me to him, and he was kind of in a little spot that was kind of a luncheonette or something. And he entered by himself and this man, and he introduced the man as a film producer. And Mr. Flint said to me, "There's no room in the inn." So some people have asked me when I've tried to tell all this, because it's so painful, every law in the book broken, don't know where my children are, try to tell about them, and I'm afraid I can hurt them further, and then get people, because they simply don't care, to tell me that they don't believe me, or they try to go after my children and, oh, well, they're just gone. They don't, instead of looking at what I'm trying to tell them, they know it's true. But their hands are clean, they think, and they'll never have to pay for any of this. So now, where was I? Mr. Flynn, I never got back in touch with him. I would call and tried to turn the car in a few times, even though, well, anyway, and they wouldn't hang up on me. They just put me on hold and switched me till I got tired. And I knew, I guess it was a form of what this whole thing's about, saying they were still there. But then this is this many years later, and here I am going through this, and there's no room in the inn, let me tell you, for whatever that means. I'm allergic to chemicals. I'm going to skip to this. I've put up on all of them, and I have an autoimmune disorder, and when I've been deliberately put, the only places I could live, since I came here in 1986, October, I've had. I'll give you an example. It's Salvation Army back then, no rescue mission here in Roanoke. It's been updated now, I understand, and well, I don't know. But anyway, back then they put me across the street in a house that was older, and a portion of it was, I guess, donated to the rescue mission. And I was given a room told that I think there were one, two, I'm not sure if it was just two women or three that were in that room, and as far as I know, there was no one else. I'm using this as an example. They told me that it was bunks. They told me that I had to specifically get in this bunk, though. And when I got in it, I was so sick. I was throwing up. I didn't know if I was going or coming, nothing. Well, this man was a former U.S., well, he still was in the Army, and that happened so many times that people who were in the U.S. Army happened to be there where I was and should not have been, like in Charlottesville, Virginia, etc. Keeping tabs on their hostage, I suppose. But anyway, he told me he didn't care how sick I was, and I mean, I'm there throwing up, dizzy, can't stand up, don't have any food, and one woman, Caroline Wilhoit. At first, she was my friend, kind of. But anyway, she helped me a little bit there, and I'm not going to go into detail other than when I finally made it up, I had to leave. And thank God I had a few bucks that I had a place to go to, and then a job that I went to live in. But anyway, they had put me in a bed that had just been painted specifically. And when I managed to crawl around to the window, you couldn't open it because it had been sealed with paint, red paint, I believe, mahogany. Now, this has happened in a lot more places than this, and one day I hope it's all told. It's such a mess. Okay. I was so sick I couldn't stand up, and this so-called preacher that was now at the rescue mission told me he didn't care. I could go down and fall under the bridge. He didn't care. So now I'm going to jump to this. This has been used against me, and believe me, people don't want it told. I've been run back and forth and walked when I could walk, and lived on the Appalachian Trail and starved and froze. And people were told not to help me, and I don't think they would have anyway. Seriously, I've lived it. So I'm going to jump, and even though I like the person, I was in a position taking any help I could get almost. This person was with law enforcement, and I still wonder. He was with multiple agencies, but he would come up on the trail, and couldn't get jobs anymore except a few live-ins. I managed to buy a tent. I did waitress job in Charlottesville, where Brits were over there trying to help me. Anyway, I'm going to lose my train of thought. It's so horrible, and I'm tired. This man I'm talking about, I'm going to mention you, Robert. He's a man who had no last name, okay? But I know, well, I met him in the federal building. I know who he worked for. He was in the car and had FBI on the back, and then he also was a marshal. But he would come up there, and thank God he did in a sense. But every time I managed to save money and get a tent, he would come up and soak it, and then he would take it down, and he said give it to the boys, scouts. Okay, now before this goes, I want to tell this. I lived at Scott Hill. The mind control murders, have been done in association a lot of times around my sons. Mark and Scott's names were used. I could keep on going, but you can grasp what I'm saying here. As in Aurora, I keep saying Aurora, Colorado, Grand Theater, James Holmes. That should give you a clue there. Gabby Gifford, she married twins. Remember twins? I was brought and given the name of a twin, and they were killed, Peggy and Carl. Gabby Gifford married Mark Kelly, who was a twin, identical, supposed to be, to Scott Kelly, NASA astronauts. In fact, Scott was up on the space lab, and when he came back down, they recently told that they had been identical, and his DNA had been changed, wasn't identical anymore, for whatever that gives you. Anyway, Gabby Gifford survived the shooting. It was in Tucson, but I think there was 12 that died, or there was 12 that were shot in it. It was one of the mass shootings like Virginia Tech and all this that the media has put up there, really. There are other shootings and killings go on, and that I haven't known anything about, and you probably will never hear, and I didn't connect the ones I knew. I've told you the ones that were done in patterns, and some of them can be proven, just like Mr. Flint's was, George Wallace's was. But it's the Tesla files, and you can cure an illness or create it. And there's lists of people that have been killed using it, okay? And I put some of them up. Now, before this goes, I'm going to lose my whole thing I was going to put up, or try to today. They used, maybe jumping around, but I had it rough, believe me. Doesn't even come close. Anyway, I can't even get HUD, low income. Let me remind you, the day I was born, I was Victoria II. My father had an addendum. He never married Wallace Simpson, a double did. He was married to my mom, Claudia Ruth O'Keefe's sister, artist Georgia O'Keefe. Now then, I'm going to lose my train of thought. I'm so tired and sick. I have lost my train of thought. I knew I'd finally do it. Let me